Hi, and welcome to Ward 13 with John Hopwood. Tonight's guest is Democratic gubernatorial candidate Mark Connolly. And since you have so much support in Ward 10, if not Ward 13, Mark, we have Lou D'Alessandro, Senator of District, 20. 20. For some reason, I was thinking of District 17, where I ran last time for state rep. But as I was saying, today until November, I'm running for county treasurer. Mark, tell us about Mark Connolly.
Well,
Short bio.
absolutely. Well, I'm proud to be sitting next to the Dean of the Senate, Lou D'Alessandro, who I'm just going to say this because he exemplifies the best of New Hampshire. I've known Lou for most of my adult life and goes back to a lot of the heritage that's good about New Hampshire, which is community service, public service, and helping people. So I'm very proud to have the support of Lou D'Alessandro and others in Manchester. So briefly, I'm entered my 6th decade as a New Hampshire native, originally from this area. Actually lived in Manchester one time on Hawthorne Street.
Okay.
Yeah, and have 38 years experience in the public and private sectors. I served as a state legislator back in the 70s, Assistant Secretary of State back in the 80s, a Deputy Secretary of State in 1999-2000, and then Director of Securities Regulation, where I fought and won for New Hampshire consumers. And that's the kind of leadership I want to bring to Concord. We have a lot of good things going on in our state. Good place to live, good place to raise a family. But, you know, I say to people, we are the live free or die state, but we have to step it up and be more than that. We have to be the innovation state. And we can talk about that in terms of education, transportation, energy. We have a lot of challenges in front of us. But I think if we elect the right people who want to get things done, we can do it. I'm running basically to get us going in the 21st century economy. And the governor has done a lot of good things, and we've elected a Democrat 18 in the last 20 years. I think that's the party of get it done, pragmatic leadership, and you know, government plays a role, but it's not the only role. And we have to have government working alongside the business community to really get our state going. Let me just say this to you, that if you go back in 2007 or 8 and you look at the revenues coming into state government before the Great Recession, and you look at where we are now, we're somewhere around 150 million, if not more, less in inflation-adjusted revenues. So if we can bring the economy back, and by the way, the budget surplus this year is 100 million more than was planned on last year. If we can continue to do that, we'll get the revenues into our government that can start to do some of the things like monies back to the towns and cities, like getting monies to the educational system that we need to do. So there are good things we're doing, but we need to step it up.
Lou, I've known you not known you, but known of you almost my entire life. Care of, I remember Mr. Bill Loeb of the union leader. Right. He didn't like you, and in my household, if Bill Loeb didn't like somebody, we liked him.
Well, God rest his soul. And, you know, Bill Loeb was a character, no question about it. And he played a very, very significant role in New Hampshire politics, particularly on the Republican side. He was certainly a free-wheeling person. In his front-page editorials, I feel privileged to have been blasted on the front page of the Union Leader by one of William Loeb's front-page editorials, because I was in the company of Gerald Ford, Dwight Eisenhower, Walter Peterson, and some wonderful, wonderful human beings that did a lot for the state of New Hampshire. But we've got a great candidate here for governor of the state of New Hampshire. He has the experience, he's got the education, but most important, he's got a feeling about what has to be done to keep New Hampshire the great place that it is. I married a New Hampshire girl. I've been here most of my adult life. I raised all of my children here. All of my grandchildren are here. I've got a couple of great-grandchildren, one and one on the way, and they're going to be here. So the idea is to keep New Hampshire what it was and to make it even better. And I think Mark has many plans to do that. His work in the Secretary of State's office was really something to be looked at very carefully, very, very carefully, and applauded for the kind of work he did as the head of securities. Now, I worked with him on a particular piece of legislation. I worked with him on the trust legislation. He was extremely helpful, and what we've done is we have created a situation in New Hampshire where the best we are the best place in the United States to have a family non-depository trust. And we couldn't have done it without the help of Mark Connolly. And he was very, very vigilant in protecting the consumer. And really, that's what it's all about. So I'm proud to support Mark. My family's proud to support Mark. And come September, I'm casting my ballot for Mark Connolly because of all of those reasons and many, many more, John. And I think we're in a very difficult time in New Hampshire. The opioid epidemic has been pervasive and it has to be dealt with. I witnessed a drug bust on Elm Street in Manchester this afternoon. I was downtown just going to a store to pick up a couple of things, and across the street the police busted a guy and put him in handcuffs and took him away. And it was a drug deal gone bad. So there are problems, and we need solutions to problems. Life is a series of problem-solving exercises, and Mark Connolly can solve the problem. So
that's so true,
yeah.
that it is a series of problems that have to be solved. Each generation has to solve them.
Sure.
But there are people in the state that want to pretend, turn back the clock and no government is
Right.
the best government, which frankly is ridiculous. As a veteran like Lou, and I worked in Washington too. But there's one thing we have to get out of the way because of Bill Loeb, the pledge. Where are you on the pledge? The pledge not to raise to raise taxes, I guess. Well, it's more important, the income tax and the sales tax.
Yeah, I mean, this is a perennial issue that comes up, the so-called pledge. I've taken the pledge because, the reality of it is that, going back to my opening comments about the recession and where we're at, we're the the second oldest state in the country demographically, and we're the fastest growing oldest state in America.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, our business start rate is now one of the lowest in the country. And it kind of goes part and parcel. If your population is getting older and you're not having enough young people here, the business start rate goes down. So in order to have the kind of economy we need, we have to keep, I think, the taxes as low as possible to get the business startups, get the jobs that we really want. And we have a low unemployment rate, that's true,
Yes.
2.8%. But that really is not in line with the economy is. We don't have enough educated workers here. So I really think if we can look at our revenue streams as they are and see if we can make some movement there, whether it's the business profits tax or the gasoline tax, tobacco tax, the interest and dividends tax, even liquor revenues. I mean, we brought in a good liquor number this past year, but when you go back 15, 20 years, I'm not sure we could do a better job. I think we
Right.
can do in terms of liquor revenues. So all of these things play a part of it. But again, we have now come up $100 million more in revenues than we expected. I think that trend line is going to continue. So the challenge of the next governor in a 2-year term is not to come up with a new revenue stream, because that's not going to happen, even beyond what I believe in terms of the economy, but politically it's not going to happen. But what we can do in 2 years to work together to get our economy going. And that's what a governor does. I say to people all the time, when you're, and Lou, to his credit, he's been on the Senate Finance Committee. He ran for governor and came very close to being the governor, and to my disappointment wasn't. But when you're sitting there and putting a budget together, there's always going to be more demand for services than revenues. So the key thing a governor does is make some judgments where to put our monies. So let me tell you this. I've looked at our budget in the last 20 to 30 years, and this is what I've found. Of the major categories of state government, transportation, education, general government, justice, health and human services, etc., the areas that we least funded have been the areas that I think we're most efficient in on a relative basis. That's education. If you go back to 2000, we put 32% of our general fund into education. Now it's 26%.
Right.
Transportation, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, we had some of the best roads and bridges in America. That's no longer the case. In fact, you go rural New Hampshire, we have some of the worst rural roads and bridges in the country. So we need to improve our infrastructure, no doubt about that, but we have to be, going back to my initial theme, innovative. We need to look at transportation differently. It can't be just we have a car economy. We need passenger rail
Right.
from Boston to Nashua to Manchester Airport to Manchester. So those are the kind of things we should be doing in terms of of looking at our revenues. And talking about adding a new revenue base is just not where we need to be as a state, and is a waste of time politically, and it's just going to be divisive. So, if you get it done, pragmatic person, you deal with the situation, you find it in a 2-year term, by the way, and you accomplish some results. So what I think the priorities are is Medicaid expansion. We've only done that for 2 years. This is $800 million new monies coming to our state over a 2-year time. We have some 50,000 people being helped by this. People who don't agree with the New Hampshire Health Protection Plan, they say, well, I don't want to do this. Well, where are these people going to go if they don't have this kind of treatment? They're going to go to the emergency rooms. And a lot of this money, by the way, is going to another priority, which is the opioid crisis. Medicaid expansion helps us deal with the opioid crisis. So these are two big issues. And the third one I'll leave you with is the city of Dover sued the state of New Hampshire because of the education funding formula. It's defunct. It doesn't work. The Attorney General's office wouldn't defend it. I think the next governor is going to really have to grapple with this issue of how we take our monies, our education monies, and get into the communities in a way that best addresses the educational needs of the state.
Lou, do you think that Mark Connolly can just step in as governor and go to work? With your experience, that the learning curve would not be very steep. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think his experience in state government certainly plays a significant role in the preparation process, particularly as it relates to the budget. We passed a new piece of legislation, Senate Bill 32, which changed the budget process. I think Mark is familiar with the change that takes place in the budget process. So the governor is going to have to predict revenues, and the departments are going to have to come in with their asks, and the governors have to deal with them, based on your revenues. Clearly,
right?
It's not going to be like the old days,
right,
where you could inflate them. So that particular piece of legislation puts a lot of pressure on the governor. And I think the learning curve is steep. It's steep for all who are participating in this process. But Mark's better prepared,
right? Because
he's been in state government. He's worked with the budget in state government, and he has the process in place. And that's really what you need. With a 2-year term, you can imagine how difficult it is. Now, opponents have had some experience, but none of them have really been in the trenches of state government, which is really where you have to be, particularly in today's world. New Hampshire state government works a little bit differently than in other states. And our 3 sources of revenue, our general fund revenue, our federal funds, and our other funds, they're commingled. And as a result, when you're looking at the spend, you have to be quite careful to find out where the money really came from.
Right.
And I think a person with Mark's experience is capable of doing that, capable of making that separation, because that has a lot to do with your prognostications for the future. And we do have a surplus. We're going to have a rainy day fund of about $150 million. The revenue stabilization account will be full, because under our statutes, that's the max. That's the max. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about the rating agency saying, Governor Connolly, what are you doing about the revenue stabilization account? And we're going to lower your bond rating. Well, that isn't going to happen. Our bond rating is solid. And it's solid not only at the state, but it's also solid in DOT as far as our turnpike bonds are concerned. So we're in pretty good shape financially. But Mark will have a key on the spend. And in my opinion, my humble opinion, if you have a handle on the spend, you have a good idea of where you're going to appropriate moving forward. And that's something that really hasn't been done a lot in state government, and we need a person who's capable of doing that. And his work at Securities is a manifestation of that. Brought in lots of money for New Hampshire. Won some very, very significant cases that were never done before, not only in the state of New Hampshire, but nationally. His the Tyco suit that he won was a landmark suit. And if you look at Tyco, you can understand why we won that. Yeah. Why we won that suit. That was a bad situation, but Mark dealt with it. The state became the beneficiary of that, but more important, the people became the beneficiary. And that's really what it's all about.
You know, I've lived most of my adult life outside of New Hampshire. Always came back to visit. My family lived here, but I lived in Massachusetts, New York, and mostly California. And one thing I know is that businesses, when they're thinking of staying or relocating, they really look to the government and a governor, whether they're going to come here. And I have a friend who's in the rather high up in a major company in Massachusetts, and he told me during the Bill O'Brien regime, if we remember that, 2010, when the Tea Party took over, people do not want to, businesses don't want to deal with that type of uncertainty. So once again, Lou, but then we'll turn it over to Mark. Isn't it vital to have somebody with experience that when a business, because we do have to attract a 21st century new economy businesses, and unfortunately we're not really doing it right now. That businesses do look towards a governor for being rational, but with policies that will promote business.
Sure, policies that make sense.
Makes sense,
And I think that's a key ingredient, and they do look to the governor. Let's give you the graphic example. Charlie Baker in Massachusetts. Charlie Baker, with the help of Mayor Walsh, brought General Electric from Connecticut to Massachusetts.
Major
economic situation for Massachusetts. Couldn't have been done without the governor's participation. I mean, that's the governor's job. You got to be the top salesman for the state of New Hampshire, and once they come here, you got to fulfill your promises.
Mark, how would you be the salesman for the state of New Hampshire, which really is a vital role?
It is. Again, we have a great story to tell. And for example, yesterday we put out our education plan, and part of that was collaborative engagement. So for example, we all know that our educational system is changing, and I say
yes,
we no longer compete with other cities, we're competing nationally. In fact, the number one word I use in my campaign is jobs. Those countries, those states, those cities have the best paying jobs, advanced manufacturing, logistics, warehouse jobs, all that kind of stuff. These have a multiplier effect on the economy. So being able to talk to business about the advantages of New Hampshire and talking about, for example, what we're doing creatively in education, which we are, by the way. We have something called competency-based education, which says that kids now are not just going to get credit for time in the seat, they're going to get credit for time in the workforce. So even here in New Hampshire, at Steam Ahead or at West High, we're saying to kids, if you align where the economy is, we're going to try and get you college credit in junior and senior year. We're going to do things like work with the business community of internships, apprenticeships. So when you talk to businesses, what they say to me is the number one issue for me is what's the workforce like? If I put a plan here, can I grow it? What's that like? So that's why education is key to our future. And energy, we have some of the highest electric costs in the country. We're part of a regional grid, so part of our challenge is to get our energy costs down. And so if we do things like that, plus what I alluded to earlier, have passenger rail service into the central corridor, all of these things create the modern economy. So one of the things I also talk about is we're a state of 1.3 million people. And we have a very educated workforce, one of the best in the country. And one of the beauties of New Hampshire is that we know how to work together on so many different levels. So if we have a problem, collaborative engagement with the business community and the state works. Let me give you an example, and Lou's probably knows this better than I do. Nobody wants to increase taxes, right? Let's put that on the table. But we hadn't increased the gas tax since 1992.
Right.
And the price of gasoline is going down. So who wants to increase gas taxes? The legislature grappled with it, and it took some courageous people in the legislature, but it also took the business community to weigh in and say, you know what, we really need to do this.
Oh, yes, business definitely, like infrastructure, and they push for it.
So we did it, and so the point is the business community weighed in. So, for example, they did it there, and I say to Democrats, business isn't the enemy here. They can be part of the New Hampshire solution. And I think that's going to happen with education too. They really want a educated workforce, and there are companies, for example, who are now giving grants to different cities to help get money to teachers. So that's the kind of thing that we really can compete much better than, let's say, a larger state like California. They can't move and be as as quick about these things and adjust to the economy that I think we can. The point is, the days of New Hampshire growing through inward migration is basically over, right? So now we have to convince these 58,000 kids in high school, you have a chance here to have a career, a family, etc. If we can capture that energy, and as Lou was talking about Boston, I mean, think of it this way: Boston is a global economy in and of itself.
Yes, it's the 7th most economically dynamic economy in the world, according to the Economist News magazine. And we're in, Manchester's 1 hour away from it. Yeah.
Think about that. Instead of decoupling ourselves from Boston, as we are now, like literally we're at the end of the line in terms of rail transportation, the more we align ourselves to the Boston economy, the better we are. I mean, we have our distinct nature of being New Hampshire people, but certainly we want to align ourselves as closely as possible with southern New England. I think our best days are ahead of us, truly, if we really can start elevating the New Hampshire advantage in the sense of an innovative economy. That's what I think the advantage is.
Living in California, people just that commuter rail, when I could live south of San Francisco, and then you just get on that rail and go right up there. You can have a job, or you went to see the Giants, but you don't have to deal with the traffic. It's on time, and it definitely is a backbone of the California economy. Otherwise, they wouldn't be building a super train now, which is going to make the Inland Empire boom. And it's funny about talking about governors, because Jerry Brown was first elected governor with my ex-wife, because it was Cherchez La Femme. That's why I wound up in California. I met my ex-wife in the Army, and we were both in military intelligence. She was 11, and now she's governor again, 53. And we often say that they had to bring Jerry Brown back to save the state. But that's how vital a governor really is. And he had the experience, because California was facing a lot of problems. And, we often think, but I still have friends out there, after him, what are they going to do? But it's vital.
Yeah,
and business is vital. He's a Democrat,
right,
and he's always a progressive Democrat, but he's very pragmatic towards business, and he probably saved California.
Yeah, I mean, let me promote myself just a little bit.
Okay.
On this one. I served on 2 transition teams in the last 30 years, one for Republican Judd Gregg and one for Democrat John Lynch. And, knowing how government works in a 2-year term is a huge advantage. And I think that distinguishes me from the other candidates. I have legislative experience, executive experience. I ran a state agency. I've helped run divisions of companies. So I think that kind of perspective, we learned several years ago. We elected a person who was a business person who didn't have business experience. I'm talking about Craig Benson. That obviously didn't go as well as we would have liked in terms of our governor. So having somebody like a John Lynch, if you will, or Maggie Hassan, that understands government but also understands the importance of business. And that's kind of my background. I've worked for Chubb Life in Concord for over a decade. I've worked for a company in Boston. I've worked here in Manchester for companies. And I have my own company now. So I think having the understanding of what businesses want and expect, and then be able to define that in terms of our government environment, I think gives me an advantage in this election.
Lou, I can't leave without you saying a word about education, particularly higher education, and how vital that is to the new economy.
No question. And we have a great university system.
Yes.
The University of New Hampshire in Durham and Plymouth and Keene, and of course we have that roustabout college up in Hanover, where
Daniel Webster,
where Magic Mark got his education.
Although I did take a couple classes at UNH.
I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you.
So you're a Dartmouth.
You saw the light.
As is Daniel Webster, who's on our background.
Yes. Class of, I think, yes, Dartmouth College grad.
And post-secondary education it's vital, and it's not only the university system, but it's the community college system. It's people who get certificates, and everybody has a different need. When I was growing up, you had to go to a 4-year school. That was the push, because my parents didn't go to college. My mother never graduated from high school. My dad just graduated from high school. They were the children of immigrant families, and they had to get a job and they had to go to work. But I think what they found out was that the the pathway to success, was enhanced by education. And we've recognized that in this country by creating a public university system and also the private universities. So we've got to fund them properly, we've got to give them the support that they need, and we've got to make accountability demands from the system. People want accountability. They'll give you the money, but they want the results. At our system, we've seen good results. We've got a very, very good graduation rate. We offer excellent programming. Our engineering school is terrific at the university. We're a land grant, sea grant, and space grant university. Now that's saying something. Community college system is doing a good job. And we have to think positively about our contributions to education. And I think Mark is familiar with it, having dealt with them, and will do what has to be done to keep this thing going. We want every kid to at least have an opportunity. Doesn't mean they have to go, but have an opportunity and be prepared. Preparation happens K through 12, and the fruition comes if you go on someplace. But vital. And in today's world, in the technological world, the 21st century, education is vital. You cannot survive without it, one way or the other. And I mean, that's a certificate, it's an associate degree, it's a bachelor's degree, and beyond. But we cannot survive as a society without quality education.
I'd say that it's more vital than ever funding the public university system, particularly community colleges, because even if you have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in the 21st century economy, everything changes so rapidly.
Yes.
You have to go back and take courses.
Yes.
And one of the advantages of California when I was there in the 90s and the early part of the millennium was you could go to a community college, which would have very good teachers, and you could keep up and current. And that is vital.
No question. And you know, at the secondary level, and this is where Mark's education plan plays a vital role. K through 12, and the kind of courses that are offered. And what we used to have is vocational technical education.
Right.
We eliminated that, and now we put appendages onto our schools. We have a wing. And Andrea Scranton, God rest her soul, from Keene, was really the author of that situation. But investing on the technical side, that's where the state plays a key role through the Department of Education. You know, we have a rotation situation where one comes up, another one comes up, and so forth, so we want to spread it across the state. But the demands on that sector of the economy is enormous. Kids understand that training is very important in the job market, and industry understands how important that training is. That is a way that the governor can really play a vital role. I mean, in supporting that.
I agree.
And coming out strong. As I said, Andrea Scranton, I was on the Committee on Education when we put that first legislation through. She was terrific. And in Manchester, we've dedicated our School of Technology. We've made it a 4-year school.
Yes.
And we still take students from Londonderry, from Goffstown, and from the surrounding community as part of that, the pact that we signed when we took the money from the state. So this is an area where Mark's really going to shine.
I want to say, first of all, I'm not just being, praising you, but what you just said about higher education was well put and defined. That was really well done. And there's a couple things Lou said that, a lot of people go by. Andrea Scranton. When you think of the history, you go back to Walter Peterson and people like that. Lou and I, when I was in the state government, I'd come by his office, and we'd talk and say, Mark, it's not like when we were in the legislature back in the 70s where we can get stuff done. Now people are divided against each other. There's really not a place we come together and try and get stuff done. That's what's lacking in state government and federal government too, by the way. And unfortunately, the bigger picture, and look at the presidential election where we're yelling at each other and name calling. We should be looking at what's the best for our kids, what's the best for our state. This kind of leadership, knowing our heritage, knowing what works, being able to talk about how we got to where we are, That's what's important. So I just want to say, when I heard Lou use those names of Andrew Scranton and be able to find what the university is, very few people can do that. And having that knowledge of our state is so vitally important. And not only that knowledge, but also the vision of where we need to go. That's the key, the knowledge and the vision.
Lou understands how vital education and in higher education is to creating an incubator for businesses.
We're very
Schools are,
sure.
you know,
Look,
yeah, go
think
ahead.
think of Manchester.
Yeah.
And let's use one example. The Dine Company.
Yes,
Jeremy
yes.
Hitchcock. Young guy, graduates from Manchester High School West, goes to WPI, comes back, and is the founder of a company. Innovative,
Right.
creative guy. But the most important thing, Mark, is he wanted to be in New Hampshire.
In
Right.
He
Manchester.
wanted to stay in New Hampshire, stay in Manchester, and that's really what we really have to push. And I think the governor plays a significant role in that
Yes.
mentality and getting that message across that the governor's going to help these companies, going to do what the governor can. I can remember when we brought digital into this state.
Right, yeah.
I was on the council in those days, and we worked very hard to create a climate that was acceptable to digital equipment company. Now we have Fidelity here, all right?
Right.
And in Manchester we have Velcro, and we want them to stay here, both in entirely different areas, one in financial management and the other in actual manufacturing. So I think the governor's got to play a significant role. I mean, the governor's really got to be a hands-on person.
I know that Hitchcock and Dean Kamen have talked about the trouble getting a educated workforce.
Right.
I don't know why Dean Kamen supports Mayor Gatsis for governor when that's one of his priorities. But you know, some people even are worried that a company like Dine might leave if we get a Republican governor. That might be a little unfair, but how do you keep the best and brightest in New Hampshire when Boston is just 55 miles away and all those jobs? And how do you attract new workers other than the commuter rail, which would be vital to that?
Well, in terms
Or
of
maybe commuter rail
no,
is number one.
Let's start there, because
Okay.
I don't want to speak for Dine,
Right.
but my understanding is that they have these really good jobs, and
Oh, yes.
and don't forget that these jobs, really help our economy. That one of their challenges is to get the kind of people up here to
With a specific technical education.
Right.
So it's not that there's not good people here in New Hampshire.
right.
But I have a friend that was in Microsoft. You have to have a certain background.
Right.
It's just a necessity.
Yeah, so I mean, this generation, millennials, they don't like to get in a car and commute north or south because they can't be on the Wi-Fi and stuff. So that's why I think train service is
Exactly.
vital to where we need to go. I mean, if you look at the Manchester Mill Yard 20, 30 years ago, I mean, that was vacant. Now it's filled with the kind of businesses like Dine that we need to improve our economy. So I think passenger rail cannot be underestimated. And I will tell you that in my estimation, there are very few things that could be such an immediate impact to our economy. Nashua and Manchester is the only area of its size in the country without passenger rail. And Manchester Airport, at its height, had about 4.5 million people flying in and out
Yes,
of
it
the year.
did.
Now it's around 2.2 million. I think a lot of that is the way we do transportation. So transportation is part of it. Energy policy is part of it. But I will tell you, everything is rooted in education. If we get education right, to be a little facetious, it's like build it and they will come. If we have, like that movie, you build a ballpark and all the old ballpark players show up. If we have a really good quality education, these companies will want to be here because we have such an incredible quality of life on the doorstep of a world-class city like Boston. We have it so much going for us.
Commuter rail, in my experience from California and other cities, it would make New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire, boom, and the whole state. It's no coincidence. Stanford, you have the Silicon Valley where I worked for 13 years, and then other great schools. And we have Boston with the great schools. But the thing is, you can get on that train, you can work, and then you get off, and it would make everything boom. I can't underestimate because I've experienced it.
Right.
And people from New Hampshire, they're critical of it, have to understand that people that come here, like to the airport, they're used to that type of infrastructure. So
You
they
know,
don't want to take a bus down
Yeah,
to Boston.
here's something to think about. We are now at historically low interest rates in our lifetime. The federal government will likely give us half the amount of money to do this, and it's around $246 million to build passenger rail from Boston to Manchester. So when you bond the rest of the money, and then you get the MBTA in Boston wants to use that.
Oh, people in Massachusetts are very into this. Yeah.
Right. So you look at that rolling stock being part
Right.
of the equation. The real number, capital cost, which is paying your debt, and operating costs, paying for the daily use, is somewhere between 5 and 7 million. So let's look at that number. The state, Manchester, Nashua, right, and the businesses. Business owners have said to me, I'd be willing to guarantee seats. And so that's one way of funding it. Another way of funding it is this. When you put in passenger rail, you have increased business profits tax, increased rooms and meals tax, parking fees.
Yes.
You have increased property values. There's ways to measure and capture that money and use that money to pay off the capital and operating budget of passenger rail. And then you move back and you see that it's estimated we'll have 5,700 permanent jobs. Housing values will go up. That everybody will benefit from that. So when people
yes.
say I'm not in favor, like I think most of the Republican gubernatorial candidates have said, I think that thinking is not what we need to have to keep the dines here, to keep the kind of innovation we have here. And the monies really is not huge and in some big subsidy as some would have you believe.
Right, there's one candidate for governor that talks about his business experience, but anybody that has a business, you have to invest in a business, or it just won't grow. It doesn't just happen by a miracle or an older brother or whatever.
Right.
You actually have to invest.
Right.
I walked, in 2014, a Wall Street Journal writer wanted somebody to go knocking on doors because she'd never seen it before. So I took her over into Ward 10, but I took her to Granite Square where my father was from Litchfield, but the family depression came up here. I was there, and we were looking at some of the houses that had been recently redone, and she thought, first of all, she was under the mistaken impression that we had a rail, and she thought this gentrification was going on, and I had to explain to her that wasn't. And this is a conservative writer, but she was incredulous. She couldn't believe it, that there wasn't a rail here, because anybody understands the great opportunity here. It would be amazing. What happened to Seattle with the Silicon Valley? Seattle became Silicon Valley North, and then Portland, Oregon became like Seattle, Silicon Valley, north, the south of it. We could have a booming economy.
If you go back, and Lou knows this, if you go back to 1990, the early 90s, Manchester, if you walk downtown, it was a ghost town.
Right.
And we had all banks going out because of the economy back
Right, I
then.
remember that.
They were all seized at one point, all the major banks. Now, and this mill yard was vacant. Now, move ahead. Where are we? We have a downtown life now. We have a ballpark. We have the Verizon Center.
Right.
We have all the mill yard filled up. We have, dining downtown now, even dining on the sidewalk.
Right.
And so Manchester is the largest city north of Boston in New England. This place is starting to really take off. And I don't want to be partisan, but in the context of running for governor, this city, in my judgment, needs new leadership. Because if this city could be the kind of city that you're talking about, we
Yes.
have all the ingredients there. We're close to the mountains, we're close to the seashore, we're close to Boston. We have Manchester University downtown. We have the beautiful mill yard. You connect all of that with passenger rail to the airport, and you get the right leadership in here. The best days in Manchester are ahead of us.
Right, and you wouldn't need to break the pledge. You really wouldn't.
No.
But I'm just saying, from a perspective of being out of state for 38 years and have lots of friends and that, they look at the place. It should be booming, and it's strong and robust. But there's another element needed to strong leadership for that. And unfortunately, the Republicans aren't going to bring that to us. I'm being strongly
Well,
partisan
I
because
think
it's my show.
I think the city had a good candidate for mayor this time around, Joyce
excellent
Craig.
candidate.
And hopefully, if Mr. Mayor Gatsis is not successful in his quest for the governorship, and if I'm part of that, I will make sure that doesn't happen with my vision of the state. But I think it's time for a new mayor for our city. Not to in any way be diminishing Mr. Gatsis, but I just think it's time for new leadership in Manchester.
We'll leave up the diminishment of Gatsis to me on next week's show. We have a caller now. Hopefully, we seldom have callers because, as one of my fans told me, we don't have them anymore. Caller, call back. People are watching the news. That was one of my most faithful fans.
Maybe they're
too.
watching the Olympics.
That too. But what about health care, Medicaid expansion?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that businesses like stability.
Yes, they do.
So,
Mark, we'll get the caller.
oh, okay.
Now they're Peter, do you know? Where are they? I'm hitting on and off.
Hello, he's there.
Hello, are you there?
Hello.
Hi. Welcome to Ward 13.
Hi, John. Hi, John. How are you? This is Jim. How are you doing?
Oh, it's Jim O'Connell.
Hi to your guests. You're singing my song there, talking about rail, etc. But I want to go back to education. I heard Ms. Connolly say that that education was key. Now, as we all know, Mayor Gatsis, who's running for governor, has overseen I think it would be maybe too harsh to say destruction of the public school system in Manchester, but he has approached that by, and we've seen all the surrounding towns in Greater Manchester leave because they don't want to put up with what's going on. So we have a most serious problem facing Manchester today is the fact that we have an underfunded education system, and I'd like to know what your guests would actually do to see that Manchester school system was properly funded. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Oh, that's a good question. So, let's divide education into, three components. You have early childhood education, kindergarten, if you will, and then you have K through 12, and then post-secondary education. So let's look at K through 12. As I mentioned earlier, we have a situation where the school funding formula doesn't work. We put about $1.4 billion into education as a state every year, and about $950 million of that is in the Education Trust Fund. Now, under Governor Lynch, we tried to come up with a system to put targeted aid to the communities that need it. And that would be, in my opinion, communities that are economically disadvantaged. Because if you don't get the kids early,
Oh, yes.
they don't move. They don't move, and it's been well documented by
John
them.
Silber at BU, I think they took over one of the local school systems. I think the cutoff is about the 4th grade. You have to have the early intervention.
Right. So we need targeted aid, and we need to have ways to measure that, whether it's English as a second language or, in Manchester, almost over 50% of the kids are getting a hot meal at lunch.
Yes.
Almost 25% of the kids in this city are living below the federal poverty wage. 40% of the kids in the city are living in a one-parent household. So, look at Manchester in terms of education and getting the monies here. Now, again, there's just so much money to go around. You need to target it where it's most needed, and I think it should go to those areas that are growing, that have the kind of school systems that needs the targeted aid. Second part of that is we have not done school building aid in about 7 or 8 years. Now, what is school building aid? That says if a community is going to build a new school, or they're actually going to maintain what they have.
Yes.
We as a state now don't have any school building aid. And what we've done is made this a separate and distinct area of funding. I'm suggesting we make school building aid part of the education funding formula. And I think, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only candidate saying these two things, but now the unique part of it is, if you look at education today, a key component is teaching. You have to have teachers who want to do this, and it's so complicated today. You ask any teacher the amount of reports they have to do, the testing, etc. We have to bring more teachers into the system. So what I would suggest is those communities that are in most need of targeted aid, we also give a component to paying teacher salaries. If we can do that, and that's going to be a negotiated settlement, I believe, with the legislature and make sure the communities that get it, I'm willing to do it. And where Governor Lynch, I think, drew up short was he was dealing with a legislature that wanted to remove the court system entirely.
Yes.
You know, you can't pick and choose the levels of government. The courts play a role in it. So if you get someone like Bill O'Brien, who's running the legislature, we don't then take a formula and rejigger it to some ideological vision of our state. And then, to your other question, if you start doing that, then businesses don't have confidence in the stability of the state. So to go to maybe tie education with your other question, Medicaid.
Yes.
If you fund Medicaid haphazardly, which now one of the big deals is we now have to say in 2017, are we going to fully fund it? We got to do it. So go back to some of the priorities I have as governor. Fully fund Medicaid expansion, make it permanent, come up with an educational formula that makes sense. And the third thing, which we haven't talked about tonight, is the opioid crisis.
Yes.
We really have to get monies to this area, and I know Manchester is ground zero, as Lou was talking about earlier, of a lot of problems.
That's true. I'd just like to say something about health care and health insurance. We only got about 10 more minutes. A business, actually, when the government is helping rationalize health insurance market, that helps business. One of the things where a governor, I think, can do is when it comes to helping, that's not employees, but businesses deal with the health insurance market, to have a rational market. Healthcare costs are so large, and they're such a part of business expenses. We often think of it just as from the employee's point of view, because we're so numerous, the employees. But how can a governor help businesses and employees with the we have this not only medical cost inflation, which affects the health insurance market.
The most important thing a governor does is to provide a safe environment, a fair environment. So, for example, as you winnow down the amount of health insurance companies, that doesn't create the kind of competition that brings rates down. So right now, some of the biggest companies are now going to merge, and that will substantially impact our health marketplace here. Anthem and Cigna, they want to merge. What a governor can do is what we should be doing, and we're doing now, oppose it.
Yes.
We should oppose the kind of concentration of markets that hurt our consumers. When you have an opioid crisis like we do, and 80% of people who end up on heroin started with opiates, and then you dial back and you realize that so many of these people were put on medications they shouldn't have been, or doctors wouldn't given the total information about the risks of these things, and some of these companies hyper-marketed these pills in our state. We should go after these companies. And I was a securities regulator, and even though I'm very pro-business, we have to have companies that do the right thing by our state.
Yes.
And so whether it's the opioid crisis, whether it's Medicaid expansion, health care, we need to do all we can to make sure it's fair and not concentrated power. That's what the governor can do, is be an advocate for the consumers of our state.
My good friend Bill Barry, who supports you, he is the alderman from Ward 10, and he's also running for Hillsborough County Sheriff. Would like to have you come on Ward 13 again to talk about the opiate crisis, because it's not something that we can, that 15 or 5 or 10 minutes does justice.
No, but let me just say this.
Right.
Bill Barry, Pat Long,
Yes.
who's also a supporter, and others have actually been at the leadership of the opioid crisis. They put a plan together that I think could serve as a model to this state in terms of how you concentrate the resources to get to the problem. Manchester, to the aldermen, have been a leader in this problem.
Oh, they have. And to talk about a little bit about Mayor Gatzis, I noticed Sununu pointed out during one of the debates something I've been writing about, that Ted Gatzis, his State of the City address of this year, was all about the opiate crisis. He didn't say one word about it in 2015 in the State of the City address. But we had the synthetic marijuana, the spice crisis the year before. The aldermen are doing great work. Bill, Pat, Danny O'Neill, those people are doing great work. And it's not just something you come in for public relations, because you're going to run for governor. But like I said,
I can see Lou wants to say something on this.
Well, I think you're right. The opioid crisis is something, and I did send information to all of the police in the areas that I represent, giving them every bill that was passed and the cost associated with each one of those pieces of legislation. And most of the money in this cycle was reconstituted money. It was money that you had to take from an existing budget. And indeed, the governor went to debt service. It took us a piece of debt service out to fund some of these situations. That means going forward in the next year, in fiscal year 18, we will have to appropriate between $6 and $10 million of real money to maintain these programs. They're going to be okay for 17 because the money came from the money,
right?
But real money is going to have to be appropriated as we go forward. And as I said in the early part of our show, I actually saw a drug bust today in downtown Manchester. I took a bus trip to Boston maybe 3 weeks ago, and I witnessed a man killing himself in the lavatory at South Station with a heroin overdose. So anyone that doesn't believe this problem is pervasive needs a rude awakening. It's something that we have to deal with, and it's got to be dealt with law enforcement, with treatment, and with rehabilitation. And the governor could play a significant role in making that happen.
Ironically, a year ago, I was talking to one of the aldermen. He was complaining that he had told Mayor Gatz about some of his ideas, and then Mayor Gatz comes out in a press conference and they're his ideas. And I walked into the library here, one of the best libraries in the world, where I grew up in, which was wonderful, the Carpenter Library, and there was somebody who looked dead. I've saw people die in the army, but they had the Narcan there. And they brought him back to life, which was amazing because the people I saw, no Lazarus there. But then they told me our frontline responders are doing such a great job, and that was his second overdose. But that's something we can have a whole show about, and I would like to, and have Pat Long on too.
Absolutely, love to.
But you got about 3 minutes. Let's give your vision for New Hampshire, and why do you have so much support in Ward 10? So give your vision of New Hampshire that's won you the support in Ward 10, if not Ward 13.
Okay, well, I'll try and do it in 2.5 minutes.
Okay.
So we're a great state, as I mentioned at the outset, so much going for us. But the deal is that we've gone down K through 12, 14 years in a row. We're going to graduate some 20% fewer high school students in the next 20 years. We need to change it up. So what I've said in my campaign, it's my theme, is innovation. Innovation in terms of education, and that means world-class jobs from early childhood on. It means things like the education funding formula. It means competency-based education. We need innovation in terms of our transportation policies, some of the things we've talked about tonight. If we have the 35th and 39th respectively worst roads and bridges in the country, we got to address that. We talked about passenger rail. We also have infrastructure problems, which we were not talking about the candidates for governor. We have maybe a need of $1.7 billion for water and sewer treatment needs in our state. We have aging infrastructure. We know we have some of the highest energy costs in the state. We need to get better on renewables. The technology is there. Our stated goal is to be 25% renewables by 2025. I believe we can be 50% by 2035. The technology is there. We need the political will to do it. We need family-friendly policies. So let me end by saying this. The decisions we make in the next couple of years could well determine if we stagnate as a state or go forward. I believe I have the vision in the background to bring us forward and be the innovation state.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. And Lou, do you mind if I go down to the Democratic headquarters and get a sign and replace yours on my front lawn?
Well, I think you could couple mine with Mark's. making a dynamic duo.
Well, I have a big yard, though. Thank you so much, and I'd like to have you back.
Oh, I'd love to be back.
And
Thank you,
thank you, Lou, and we'll see you next week on Ward 13.
The time has come for us to say sayonara. My heart will always be yours for eternity. I knew sometime we'd have to say sayonara. Please promise that you'll be returning someday to me. I'll remember our romance until the day that I die. I'll see your face in the moon and stars in the sky. So hold me close before you say sayonara, and promise that you'll always keep me near to your heart.
Astronauts report it feels good. This is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.